I feel very happy and excited to have this opportunity to speak in front of the veteran investor community. Uh, Although it's a little bit early for me, it's 6 a.m., but I'm pretty excited and psyched to speak about this topic, which I'm very passionate about. And I have tried to keep this presentation and this discussion as simple as possible so that everybody can understand what exactly is SaaS paradigm and what's changing and where exactly to look for opportunities. I'm here to present a perspective on technology and how it is reshaping the way world consumes software. Although I have worked in technology in almost all capacities, I still can't say I'm the expert. But this presentation today is my view, or let's say an opinion on how to confront this technology revolution unfolding in front of us, right? So it may unfold exactly as anticipated, or it may not. With that caveat, I move on to the standard disclosure that the content of these presentations are for educational purpose and only for the information. I'm not a SEBI registered analyst. So none of the comments or the stock discussion, the company discussion that we might do today should be construed as a stock recommendation to buy, sell anything. It's only for the research purpose to bring out the information in front of you. And in no way it should be perceived as a stock recommendation or a buy sell recommendation. So we proceed further now. And, before we start looking at SaaS and the possible opportunities, it is imperative that we understand a brief evolution of the software, right? Because unless you understand how things started, you will not understand where things are going, right? So understanding this is necessary to know exactly how SaaS is different from the traditional software. So right at the start, it wasn't so much about software. Hardware was more important. So I'm sure some of you or many of you would remember those Apple Macintosh PC days. The PC used to come in a colored body, right? So it used to be one of the key attractions back then in the 90s. Hardware was the primary sales unit and software was a bundled product that allowed you to operate the hardware, right? So software was always an accessory to something else. It was never a key focus area. Now, things changed when Microsoft launched Windows. So independent of any hardware. So it allowed people not only to run an operating system of choice, but also install furthermore programs like with the productivity programs that would allow them to do a lot many things other than just doing some specific things. So that was the key deal. Then the early days of the mainframe and database and the enterprise software basically gave birth to bulky licensed software products. And that would be delivered in multiple hard drives or multiple CDs and installed at a rack space server on a client's data center, right? So it would require somebody personally go to the server rack at the data center, insert the CD, follow the installation steps, complete the complete that setup, then also follow the post installation steps, reboot a few hundred times, and then finally you would have a product that is ready to access but not yet ready to use in a business, right? So this was only provisioning of the software and not consuming it. So when we say provisioning it, it means that you are just making it available, and consuming it, it means that you are actually doing a business on it, right? So software companies then would send specialized programmers or consultants who would know how that software works, right? To customize that to meet customers' need. And this activity used to be run as a project that would run over years in some cases, especially in the enterprise paradigm. We still operate in somewhat similar but not exact business paradigm. A lot has changed, but a lot more is yet to be changed, right? So the large enterprises still run the transformation project that spans over years. So it involves hundreds of people working in software provisioning, implementation, customization, and so on and so forth until the support, right? So the companies have flourished over this business model, and where they earn a hefty licensing fees, they reference out the implementation to a certified partner in where our Indian IT companies comes into picture, right? and they also earn enough through the maintenance contract or the implementation contract. So this is how software has been so far predominantly. The software product scene is now transforming very rapidly. And there is a significant shift from how business used to consume software historically to how business consumes it now. So historically, traditional businesses were market followers. What I mean by that is they were late adopters of software product for many reasons, right? So they were just risk averse, or they wanted somebody else to adopt that first, learn from the mistakes, and let the entire product mature, and then they would adopt, right? So many large traditional non-technology businesses were shy of buying very large bulky software initially. Then came the stable enterprise software companies who changed this paradigm to some extent, but many continued with the legacy solutions. And when I say legacy solution, that means that's something that you are developing for your own self. It has no standardized process, and the external person to your organization would not understand what exactly have you built, and there will be no compatibility kind of things built in, right? So it's very, very specific, tailor-made for your organization and for your processes. So that's what we call a legacy, right? So legacy software. So um, what happened is many continued with the legacy solutions because of the same reason, right? So since this total cost of owning this entire piece of software was so large with big enterprise software, only players who bought this system and spent more money on top of it were the companies those were really, really, cash rich. So that said, enterprise software isn't all a happy story yet. So there are, the negative sides of implementing this bulky, perpetual, big sticker price softwares as well, right? So it's important that we understand how things were and what actually made things change, right? So I still remember when um, I think couple of or a decade ago, there was a failed implementation of the enterprise suite at a very giant retailer in Germany, and they had to write off about 500 million euros in a project cost. So you can imagine the stakes and the money at stake, right? So when it comes with a perpetual on-premise application licensing, your stakes are extremely high and there is absolutely no scope for failure. And if there is a failure, companies would have a risk of going bankrupt. And if a company is listed on the entity, so there is a high risk of your stock prices getting hammered just because your core enterprise software implementation is going for a toss, because your enterprise software directly impacts the core processes of a business where your cash flows are. So it directly impacts the order flow for a traditional manufacturing company, for example, right? So the risk is very heavy, and you would see from NSE and BSE notification many times that a company has undertaken, let's say, an enterprise implementation project or SAP implementation project, and so on and so forth. So when you read these kind of notifications, you have to read these with a pinch of salt, that if things go south, it can turn out very ugly for the company, right? So with changing software delivery and consuming consumption paradigm, this is changing, right? So with cloud and SaaS, companies can now only buy a piece of software, run a pilot at no cost, right? So since you don't have to risk so much, companies are more willing to run digital transformation projects. So from market followers, the companies are now turning up to be early adopters. So this is a significant shift in technology today. An outcome of this is that all our major IT companies are reporting ever growing digital revenues. And this is just a start. We have only scratched the surface here. So companies that had no budget so far, right, are also lining up to become early adopters. So this cloud and SaaS with the new age offering like DevOps and low code, no code has actually enabled companies to embark on digital transformation journeys that's not only sustainable but also profitable. And profitable very early. You don't have to wait like 4, 5, 7 years until your implementation to be completed, and then you start looking at your profitability. So your time to profitability has been brought down significantly with these new age cloud and SaaS offerings, right? So moving forward, what is SaaS? So it's one of the three elements of the entire cloud computing. So understanding SaaS does not mean only understanding the business model, but also understanding where in the technology stack does it fit, right? So as you can see from this slide, SaaS is only one of the components of the entire cloud computing. So when you are looking for investing opportunities, for example, as an investor, understanding this relationship helps you understand which company is vertically integrated, and which company is basically offering the horizontal services, or if a company is operating only in one of the three business models, right? So it's so vertical integration was a concept applicable only to manufacturing companies or chemical companies and pharma companies earlier, right? But if you know how to look at this industry from this structure perspective, you can apply similar concept here as well. And this helps you in comparing and separating the wheat from the chaff. So this will help you pick better companies, and not only those who are operating in one of the business models, right? So we will understand exactly how each of these offerings differed from one another in the next slide. So this slide details out elements we just saw on the previous slide. Based on what service is managed by whom determines whether it's a infrastructure as a service, which is the second column, this one. Platform as a service, this is PaaS, and then you have SaaS. So these are the four different software consumption paradigm. One is the on-site, which is a bulky license that somebody comes and installs that software at your place, at your service. And then we have the three of the cloud computing element. So infrastructure as a service gives you the flexibility to buy only the components you need and scale them horizontally or vertically as you need. Low operating expenses and zero maintenance cost makes this infrastructure as a service a very affordable option. The major drawback of this is that there is a potential security issue, because you would be sharing infrastructure and the resources with multiple customers. So ensuring that data security, ensuring your infrastructure boundary is something very little complicated, not very, but a little complicated. And the reliability of this service is also very important, because if somebody else start consuming more resources, you would have fewer resources at your disposal, right? So however, these disadvantages can be avoided by choosing a very reliable and trustworthy partner. So who are the companies that are operating in this vertical? Microsoft AWS, Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. So these are the top name that comes to my mind right now, who are operating in this vertical, who are offering infrastructure as a service. Now coming to PaaS, um, it basically provides customers both hardware and software in its own infrastructure, and the dedicated tech stack is made available to customers via internet. As simple as that. So this offering is specifically aimed to fast track the software development process. Now, developers or coders, as we know, who need specialized environments or specialized software that requires to be installed on their systems, like laptops and whatever the office systems, to write the software, they require these environments, right? Specialized IDEs, as we call, like so to and these IDEs or these environments or these specialized software required were resource heavy. So just until a few years ago, developers required to install a specific software on their computer to write software, and it needed each developer to have certain system configurations, RAM configuration, hardware configuration, and so on. And it was expensive, right? So with platform as a service, now this is taken care of by the service provider. So what happens is developers get the development environment, or we call as IDEs, which is a very specific developer term, which may not necessarily be relevant for the investors community, but still I'm just mentioning it for the reference, right? So So developers get access to these environments where they can write their program or write their code on the platform itself. And they don't need to have anything else installed on their computer. So they need just a computer, a browser, an internet connection, and of course the authorized access. So that's all you require when it's a PaaS paradigm. And some of the examples of the companies who are operating in this vertical are, let's say, Beanstalk, OpenShift, or even SAP HANA Cloud, right? So now coming to the key focus area of today's SaaS. So this is most comprehensive offering of the entire technology stack, and you get all the offerings of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service integrated into this vertical. Okay? So companies love SaaS because there is absolutely nothing required to be installed, no data centers needed to be provisioned, and companies don't have to do sizing and load testing activities. So when I say sizing and load testing activities, let's say imagine you have a software which is completely running in a particular setup, and suddenly you are changing something into that software. So you need to know that change would break it or still ensure that it runs smoothly, right? So that's what I was referring to. So now companies can simply scale up or scale down the infrastructure or resources at a click of a button. Now consider this scenario. You are, let's say, an e-commerce company that sells festive goods online or electronic goods online. And you know there are only specific months when you get a very heavy demand and the order flow is at peak in those months, but the rest of the months it's just very average. So if you go with the on-premise or on-site model, the perpetual mode to maintain your web shop, you have to maintain the infrastructure scalability throughout the year. So even when it is not needed. So essentially, you're carrying technical debt on your books. And the result of that is a loss in the profitability since this is a margin leak, right? This is a direct margin leak. So with SaaS, you don't maintain anything on your side. You log into your web shop dashboard from a specific URL and simply provision the capacity in specific months and scale it down in the rest of the months. So not only you get rid of the technical debt, but you also, your margins improve significantly. That's the main reason companies are adopting SaaS more and more these days. But at the enterprise scale, this there is still a lot to be done, but scene is changing rapidly. Take SAP for example, right? SAP was a very bulky software, and it was known that its user experience is terrible. It was bulky, heavy, perpetually licensed ERP company. And if you want to buy SAP, it would mean that you have to shell out a few $1 million from your pocket. So a decade ago, they changed their roadmap that enabled them from transition from transaction to application. What I mean is the customers would get an application for the underlying business process that can be accessed over internet without need of maintaining the entire SAP or entire enterprise suite. You get what you want, nothing more, nothing less. That's it. So that's what is changing. Okay. So uh, now coming to the SaaS business models, it's very interesting to see SaaS a little bit differently from the traditional software, right? So what is SaaS really doing? So SaaS financializes the software instead of selling a software at a sticker price. What it means is it commercializes the components and bits and pieces of the software. It slices and the big large software down into a number of small applications, and then it commercializes those applications further down, right? So there are these two primary business models in SaaS. One is the low touch SaaS model, which has the lowest frictions to start. To onboard a customer and go to market is very, very short. So it involves very less human touch, and most of the sales channels are completely automated. For example, the example of this models are, let's say, the email marketing software or the document lifecycle management tools or web security products or the content delivery network services that large e-commerce companies that use. So these are completely low touch, and the high touch SaaS offerings are relatively closer to business core functions, and it requires SaaS companies to explain their customers the solutions and help them find right product for the right process. For example, let's say approval flow management or certain banking or underwriting functions. So companies such as, for example, Intellect Design or Newgen Software comes into mind when we are speaking of high touch SaaS. The sales and product team interacts with the customer from early on, and it stays with customer until go to market or a release. So low touch SaaS are mostly no code offerings. When I say no code offering, means it's plug and play, right? So you buy a SaaS product, you subscribe it, or let's say monthly or annually, and you directly start using it. There is no option to change anything on the screen, anything in the business process. Okay, so it's absolutely uh, no provision to make any changes to the code to tailor make something, right? So that's what the low touch SaaS is, primarily no code. And the high touch are low code. So what low code means is it still has a little bit of space to make certain changes on the UI or certain changes in the underlying business process to ensure that the software fits your business requirements perfectly. So the product market fit is exactly what is discovered in this process. And when it's a low touch SaaS, the product market fit is already discovered by the software developers, and you don't have to do that anymore, right? So this is basically the business process is very specific with the low touch SaaS models, and right. Also, the low touch SaaS products are mainly sold through monthly subscriptions models, right? With an average contract value, let's say less than $10,000. And some of the companies that come to my mind who are operating in this low touch model are Trello or Jira or Confluence, Slack even. Yes, so these are some of the examples of this model. And some of these companies are even publicly traded in the US markets. So, and the high touch SaaS contract values, the contract values are minimum $15,000 onward, and customers get full product suite, and that caters multiple different business processes. And for example, Salesforce or SAP HANA Cloud. So these are the high touch SaaS offerings that comes to my mind. So the now we have to understand, now we are eventually understanding, first what we are understanding is what is a very rough crude business model, which is low touch and a high touch. And then we would understand what are the different metrics that matters in this case, right? So we have different slides to understand the different metrics, right? So now coming further down to specific business models, we have typically three. One is a traditional perpetual licensing that comes at a large ticket price, which requires heavy customization since product build is generic, right? And not specific, meaning different companies from different industries require to customize relevant business processes to fit the need. And there is a support and maintenance contract also that's sold at a different price. Plus, there is also customizing expenses that customers have to bear. So in this model, the product companies require heavy investments in the R&D, and that spanned over a number of years before the product is finally monetized. So until this R&D expenses eats the profits, okay? So until then, I mean, until the product is monetized. So if you are interested to buy such companies, the product companies, the traditional product companies who don't yet have SaaS based offering, so it's always better to buy them when their R&D phase is at mature level. So you have to listen to company con calls to understand this, and you need a little bit of technology understanding to determine when R&D would essentially end. And however, once R&D phase ends, the company suddenly gets kind of a shot in the arm, and the leverage kicks in. And this enables companies to post outsized profits, right? Because your R&D expenses is no longer eating the profits, and the recently monetized products are bringing in large margins. So this phase also eventually, unfortunately, this phase also ends eventually. And if a company isn't transitioning into a SaaS, so in that case, companies again have to start investing, and they have to upgrade the product, build new features in, scale up the user experience, and the cycle begins once again. That's why traditionally people used to call that the technology product companies are a cyclical business. that used to be the reason because of which it was termed as a cyclical business, right? So there is a constant upgrade and patching activities that are running that requires customer to continuously perform the compatibility test, right? After each upgrade, it's just like you get an upgrade for your Windows for your laptop, and you have certain softwares that are already installed on your laptop. What happens if suddenly Windows doesn't recognize that software? So it's not a good deal. So but laptop we use for personal use, and we can say, okay, it doesn't matter, we'll find out a different compatible software. But in business, that's not the case. You have to ensure that all these upgrades and patchings are not breaking anything else, and they are not actually disrupting the businesses, your business processes, day-to-day business processes, right? So that's what I said. There is a constant upgrade and patching activities that are running. And so as you can see, this is very inefficient way of operating. So SaaS changes this completely upside down. So companies don't have to purchase these heavy licenses. We already talked about it. No need to worry of the upgrades and the testing, and basically the continuous deployment and continuous integration, which is a key paradigm of SaaS. It ensures that the customers doesn't even realize that there is a software upgrade which is going on. It's just like your phone. You get a notification that there is an upgrade going on, and it installs the upgrades at the night. And the software ensures that whatever customizations that you have made, those customizations stay still relevant to your business processes, right? Now, coming to the subscription model, which is the second model here, the companies offer monthly or yearly contracts. But if you don't renew contract at the end of the period, you lose access completely. So that's not the case in case of the perpetual mode. In that case, you have access to software for the lifetime, but you don't not necessarily get support from the company who is providing that software beyond a certain period, right? So the best thing about subscription model is that if you are a company who is selling SaaS as a subscription, your revenues are predictable, very predictable. Now there is an upfront cost, of course, of trying to reach and win over new customers, but that's with all the businesses, right? Not only with SaaS, but it's with all the businesses. So, but once those customers are in and have signed up for your services, you can predict revenue for months in advance, and you can build predictive business models that how would your revenue run rate would look like 2 year on the line, 5 year down the line, and so on and so forth. Now, because of the monthly nature of subscription services, you have an extended period of time to develop a relationship with the customer, right? That means you can learn what your customers value, and what they like to see change, is if at all they want something to be changed, what is that. The feedback, the customer's feedback, your customer's feedback can allow you to further improve your model and retain the customers for a longer period of time. Now, because the subscription service, the subscription model is based on the concept of selling one idea and getting that idea to stick a month on month basis. So the initial budget for reaching and procuring new customers can be somewhat larger than it would be with more traditional business model. On the other hand, because of the nature of the subscription service, you can spend far less on customer retention. So your customer retention expenses are really, really low. Now, there are two classic examples that comes to my mind right now for the companies that switched from the perpetual licensing to the subscription based business model. One is Microsoft, who was losing a big amount of business to Google on a number of services like business email, collaboration, and the documentation like Microsoft Word and so on. And what happened then is Microsoft switched to subscription model for their entire Office suite. And suddenly Microsoft improved sales since more companies opted for Office 365, which is a subscription based offering. Now, similar is the case with Adobe. So their Photoshop is globally well known, but it's also one of the most expensive softwares. I remember back in the days of BitTorrents when we used to download software and games, the demand for the null Photoshop software was very high. I'm sure a lot of you must already be able to, kind of understand what I'm talking about. Now, this was resulting in a loss for Adobe. And what happened then is Adobe launched their specific cloud SaaS offering called Adobe Cloud, and it was possible to sell access to Photoshop at a fraction of a cost. So what happened? It helped companies suddenly expand their reach. It was able to reach more customers and close the revenue leak. So that was a very big deal, right? So the one of the risks with this model is the churn or the cancellation. Because the customers don't have too much at stake, so they can simply cancel at one click. Okay, so that's one of the negative factors of this model. Now, coming to pay as you consume, it's not as in vogue as we might think it is, but it is one of the recent extensions of the subscription model. It's not a very completely different model, but it's one of the extensions of the subscription model. This is very good for the end customers, right? But it's not very good for the companies offering these services, since you don't know when customer will increase the usage, when cut it down. You have to spend heavily to build analytics and predictive models for each of the industry and the customer, to predict the normalized demand, right? Since the revenue is so unpredictable, companies need to build predictive models to report the normalized revenues, then which can be very, very misleading for investors. And for that reason, many companies offers only infrastructure-related services in the pay-as-you-consume model, right? So this is what basically the perpetual and subscription and pay-as-you-consume goes. And I don't have to explain this side. I'm just presenting this.
One
This
question,
is just
Amaya,
one
about
of.
the pricing model. How do you see the margin profiles of different uh, models of subscription?
Yes. Can we take this as a question at the end?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Thank you so much. So, as I was explaining this, I don't have to go in explaining this slide in detail. It's very self-explanatory, right? It's just showing you that when you have a on-premise large bulky software, a end customer would think that it's only a licensing cost and the maintenance and upgrade overheads that I'm getting. But that's not really a case. So it's only a tip of an iceberg. And then you have large number of activities which come as an indirect cost, which you don't foresee immediately, right? But with the SaaS, actually, that's not the case. So you can see it's only a subscription cost, and there is a little bit of end user training that's involved. There is nothing else. Okay, so I would not spend much time on this because we have some interesting metrics that we have to discuss, which are very specific to the SaaS companies. So we will move on to the matrix, the valuation matrix that matter, right? So now let's keep things very simple for now. So the number of so your revenue basically you is basically let's focus on the number of customers you get for now. Okay, so the number of customers you get is a product of two factors, and that's the acquisition rate and the conversion rate. So acquisition rate is basically the rate at which you're acquiring a customer lead only, and conversion rate is how many of those acquired lead you are converting into a real customer who is eventually paying. Okay, so that's basically a product of two things: acquisition rate and a conversion rate. The average lifetime revenue per customer, and which is also often called as the lifetime value or LTV. It's one of the metrics of SaaS companies. Now, is the product of how much a customer pays you for a particular period, which can be, let's say, 1 month or 12 months or 36 months and so on, and how many periods they persist using your service. So they persist for 12 months or 36 months or 60 months and so on. So the average revenue per user, or ARPU as we call it in the SaaS, is simply the average revenue for an account over any particular period. Okay. So basically, these are some of the very, very simple metrics that you can start tracking for any company who is operating in a SaaS model. And finally, the churn, it's very important. The churn is the percentage of your customers over a given period who are discontinuing your services, who are not coming in to pay for your services next month. Okay. For example, if you have, let's say, 200 customers who pay you this month, and only 190 of those pay in the next month, right? So the churn is 5%. What happens is basically a 5% churn rate means you're losing about 50% of your total customers every year. Actually, it's 60%, but it's 50% ballpark figure. So that's what you're losing your total customers every year. And while the new ones are coming in, a churn rate of 2% is very common. It's very common with the SaaS companies. So if you look at the companies like Freshworks or the ChargeBee, for example, or Postman, which is an Indian startup, the churn rate of 2% is very common. And but a churn rate of something close to zero is an ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world. But anything more than 3% is not good. So if you are evaluating a SaaS company that has a churn rate of 3% or more, and it has been operating in business for more than, let's say, 5, 7 years, then you have to be very careful about whether to invest in that company or not. Because what happens is, like Srini just asked, what are the business margin profiles for these different things, right? So for the subscription-based models, your margin profiles vary from anywhere between 60% to 70%. That's what I have seen. Of course, initially when you are incurring costs to build your entire service offering, your upfront costs are relatively high, but your margins are exponentially higher, because what happens is once a customer is acquired, you spend very less on the customer retention. We'll come at these metrics a little later. The perpetual licensing had even better margin profile, but the problem was, unless the company sells a license, the rest of the margin profile doesn't get unlocked. What I mean by that, let's say if a company that provides, let's say, digital core banking product, and it's not able to sell the license itself, then the margin expansion that comes from the customizing of that software and the implementation of the software or maintenance of the steady state of that software, that margin profile doesn't even open up for the company. So even though we think that the margin for the perpetual licensing company is very high, but there is a risk of companies' inability to sell the licenses at very elevated costs, right? And there are also penalties also which are part of the contract. So, for example, the implementation partner comes in and tries to implement something, and then they fail. So there are heavy penalties which are charged to the vendors, and there are lawsuits, and many things happen, and that's the perpetual business model. But with the SaaS, what happens is your margin profile is consistently in the north of 60 to 70%, and that's what I have seen as a common industry trend. Okay, so these are some of the very basic metrics that you can see while evaluating a SaaS company. Now let's understand what are the growth metrics. Okay, and when you are looking at a SaaS company, there is one thing that's like in traditional equity analysis, we always see what is EPS, right? So that's the first metric we look at, right? So in case of SaaS, that's MRR or ARR. So I'm not saying that it is similar. EPS is equal to MRR. I'm just saying that it's one of the most common valuation parameters that we look at. Okay. So MRR is simply your recurring revenues per month, and when you analyze it, it is ARR. Okay, as simple as that. This is very straightforward. But it is important to understand how ARR or MRR is formed, or is how it is composed. So breaking down this MRR and ARR into its key components, it basically helps you to understand the changes in these valuation parameters over time for any given period. For example, we want to understand the contribution of the following. Let's say, like for example, the retain MRR is basically the revenue that you are retaining from the existing customers. Okay, what is expansion? It's basically the revenues that you are adding from the existing customer. So that's indicating that you are able to get more pocket share of the existing customer, right? So this is an important metric. And this expansion rate is basically the ratio of the additional annual or monthly revenue that you are getting from the existing customers to the previous month annual or monthly recurring revenues. It simply indicates if a company is able to upsell or cross sell more to the existing customers or not. It needs more customers, more clients to maintain the revenue. Okay. Yeah, so we already know what a churn rate, we have seen it, but that's in a percentage. Um, and you can also translate this metric into a revenue churn. For example, let's take an example. So, uh, is there a question? I can see somebody speaking. If not, please, can you go on mute? Thank you. So I was taking an example. For example, your, let's say, annual run rate or annually recurring revenue is 10 crores and your churn rate is 10%, for example. So you are leaking 1 crore worth of revenue despite the perception that you're growing, right? So you simply add the new ARR MRR to the expanding ARR MRR, which is sum of all earnings from your existing customers, and then you subtract the revenue churn from this. So you get a negative churn. Okay. So if your annual run rate or monthly run rate expansion is very high with a negative churn, you can be sure that the company is doing phenomenally well, is able to manage the growth, manage the capital, manage expenses phenomenally well. But again, the churn rate is more valid for the pure play SaaS product and companies. And for the enterprise cloud product, this may not necessarily be relevant. Okay. So the further slides are self-explanatory. I'll not spend more time in that because we have to see some of the opportunity slides as well. And we have about 13 minutes to go. So I'll just move over to the next slide. So it's very important. Now you understood what are the growth parameters. You have to understand what is the capital efficiency matrix. Okay. So when I say capital efficiency matrix is you need to understand how company is able to handle the capital. Okay, the SaaS companies, because one of the questions that, and you see that the new age businesses, they burn cash all the time, right? So one of the most important capital efficiency metrics is the burn multiple. What is burn multiple? It's the net cash you are burning divided by net new annual run rate. Okay, that's very straightforward. That's a formula. You can Google it. You can find it anywhere. It's common. Okay, so in simple term, it is basically how much is the company burning in order to generate each incremental rupee of annual recurring revenue. Okay, so I'll repeat that. How much is the company burning in order to generate each incremental rupee of annual revenue, rupee or dollar or euro, whatever you currency you use. So just to give you a very kind of a heuristic on this, burn multiple of something which is over 3 is very bad, very, very bad. The startup or a company, let's say for a company that reports that, let's say it burned $2 million in a specific specific quarter, while it added only one, let's say 1 million to its ARR. Okay. So that's basically 2x burn multiple. It's pretty reasonable for an early age SaaS company. Okay. On the other hand, if a company is burning, let's say 5 million in one quarter and it's only bringing in 1 million in the new ARR. So that's a terrible burn multiple. That's a 5x burn multiple. So it means is that the company needs to cut down their costs immediately in order to stay alive, right? So these are some of the small things that you can look at. And the venture capitalists, they use burn multiple to value these new businesses. The startups, for example, like Zomato, Paytm, they are often valued based on what is a burn multiple of the early stage investors. So I'll give you an example. So if you are an investor who is coming in the seed round, you see, okay, there's a burn multiple of 3, but there is a possibility that company would go to a burn multiple of 2. Okay. So in their terms, it's a progress. But for investors like us, we see that it's still cash burning business. As simple as that. So it's just that it's burning cash at 3x speed. Now it would burn at 2x speed. And then probably it would burn at 1x speed with a hope that it would not burn any new age SaaS or new age digital businesses are. So what happens is the early investors, the seed investors, who buy, sorry, who invest in the company at a 3x burn rate, they sell their 3x burn rate investment on a hope of reaching to 2, and then the investors who come in at 2x burn multiple, they sell it to the further set of investors on a hope of reaching it to 1, and eventually the company IPOs. Okay, so what essentially it means is, even though its burn multiple has come down, it's still burning cash, it's not reporting profits, for example. Okay, so that's very key insight. You can actually look at these new digital or newly listed business and try to find out these burn multiples. If you don't know, you can just go to a con call. If they're not conducting con call, you can simply write to the company secretaries and ask them, hey, what is your company's burn multiple? Can you give this out? Do you have this information? And you can compare that burn multiple over the performance of past 5 years, 6 years, and 7 years to really understand, okay, now this company, whether it's really going to be profitable or not. Because this is one of the very commonly asked questions on the social media, right? Let's take the recent example of some of the companies that have listed at very high premium, but they have fallen on the listing day. So people really don't know whether the company would turn profitable or not. But if you know that in the past 7, 8 years, company has come from burn multiple of 3 to burn multiple of 1, then there is a very high possibility that this company would turn profitable, and that becomes your potential investment option. And while the entire traditional investors community is ignoring this idea, saying, hey, they are still burning cash, but you are looking at these things a little differently. Okay. So this is basically how you look at opportunities. Okay, so this is what the efficiency, the capital efficiency metric is. Now we have already talked about churn rate, percentage, and ARR, MRR expansion rate, percentage. 1 minute. Okay, so the CAC is basically the cost of acquiring a customer, the customer acquisition cost. What I want to bring your focus on this slide is the revenue recognition model. I'll give you very key, interesting insight. So changing how you recognize revenue can also have deep impact on your cash flows. Back in 2000, the year of 2000, Salesforce was struggling to keep positive cash flows because of the dot-com crash just a while ago. The funding was completely dried out and they were not getting any additional fundings, and it was very difficult to maintain positive cash flows. So what Salesforce did is they changed revenue recognition model and the billing rate from monthly to yearly, and customers had to pay it all in advance. So this change basically made sales over turn cash flow positive immediately. And you may say that this is an accounting gimmick, okay? But if your churn rate is low, your ARR, MRR expansion is very high, then this isn't an accounting gimmick, but it's very thoughtful change. Okay. So we as a investors will have to also evolve and understand how to evaluate these new age businesses and a software SaaS businesses, so that we don't keep on applying our traditional valuation methods and ignore the opportunity that is unfolding in front of us, right? Now, there are the next two slides are extremely important, and extremely, that's what I'm pretty sure you all are listening to my technologist talk early in the morning on a Sunday morning, um, uh, only in a hope that you would get to know what are the different opportunities that I'm going to talk about, right? So the next two slides, this and the next slide, are the of key interest. I'm sure about it. So um, so there are a number of different opportunities which are available, as you can see from the screen. Postman is one of the very high potential startup, and it's already a unicorn. When I say unicorn, it's clocking a valuation of $1 billion plus. So to help you find out more opportunities, who is doing what, which startup is at what phase, you can go to this Indian SaaS tribe on saasboomi.com, and you can actually find out uh, thousands of different SaaS based startups listed. And then you can really find out, okay, which startup is operating in what domain. So for example, let's say you are from pharma or you are from some, let's say, manufacturing or a chemical field, and you want to understand, is there a company who is building a certain business process that would reduce the expenses in some software expenses for your business, or a banking product, for example. So you can always head up to this place and you can find out the Indian SaaS paradigm, which company is doing what. Okay. And as per their recent report, the Indian SaaS space can create 1 trillion in value by 2030. So I'm very, very optimistic of that. It may not necessarily be 2030, but over a decade, next decade, things will move really fast. So when it comes to technology expansion curve, it's like a bamboo shoot. It stays plateaued for quite a bit and then it just shoots up. So until now, until last year, we were at the end of this plateau phase, and the COVID has kind of given a shot in the arm, okay, to this entire technology and digital adoption ecosystem. So the ways of working have gone easier because your field sales, pre-sales, your working collaboration, everything is now digital, right? And there are multiple layers of opportunities. So some of the names which I have listed here, these are indicative only. So I'm not gonna give out ready-made ideas to you, but I'm going to help you how to find an idea. That's more important, right? So there are multiple layers of opportunities from edge to core. So there are companies who operate in a CRM or sales channels to collaborate and design and delivery and much more. For example, if we take Intellect Design or let's say NewGen, these companies, they operate in different modes. So Intellect Design has certain offering in the core of the digital banking processes, and NewGen basically operates on the edge of the business cube. So it basically takes care of the accessory business processes. That's essential. But if you don't automate those processes, you would end up spending more human capital, time, money on those processes. Okay. So what matters to us investors is the access to opportunity, right? So how many of us really had an access to invest in these startups early on? So there is no platform available for us to invest in these companies unless we have a very large sum to invest, correct? So, or there is an option that, and what's happening is most of these companies are debuting on US because most of their investors are from US. They have to give the exit to the early investors in the dollar denomination. So that's why you saw Freshwork, whose development and everything is basically done from India, but they listed in the US. It's for the same reason. Sorry. There is another SaaS company called Pine Labs, and it's also rumored that they would also list in the US. But there are some media articles about it, and please don't take it as a recommendation or a single source of truth. Uh, but this is what is happening. So the access to these opportunities for us retail investors is not very great. We have to wait until the company IPOs, and by the time companies IPOing, a lot has been lost on the table. So there is nothing, there is not much on the table left, right? Because the valuations and the at which these IPOs come is exorbitant, right? So, but there are certain startups which you can look at, and if you figure out an opportunity to invest in these startups, then it's really great. But for a common investors, the opportunity to invest in Indian SaaS ecosystem or an Indian SaaS startup space is not very great unless you have a very large ticket size of sum to invest. But Postman, Browser Stack, these are some of the startups I am actually very, very positive about. Pine Labs, I'm really keen to look at the IPO and how would they basically bring out their IPOs. What Postman does, it may get a little technical. I'll quickly tell you what Postman does is it allows companies who are offering their APIs, which is application programming interfaces. They allow these APIs to be tested completely before they hit the production. So these startups are very, very promising, but unfortunately, no matter how promising these opportunities are, we don't have access to these, right? So that's where the second slide comes into picture now. So, so the what's happening is the India's traditional IT companies are transitioning some part of their product portfolios from, or some part of their portfolios from the vanilla IT services to product, and they are moving those products to the SaaS. And that change is very interesting. One needs deep understanding of the listed companies to know where to look. Okay. So the new age players, so the companies that operate in no code, low code space, they have the highest traction from both end customers as well as the software integrators globally. Okay. So just some of the sorry yeah, so some of the names which I have listed down here, and this is perhaps the most interesting slide, because this aspect is ignored by investor to great extent. People chase high burn multiple digital SaaS companies or digital platform businesses, but they ignore traditional companies that are making large strides in the SaaS, okay, converting a lot of their product offering and switching over to SaaS without burning a cash. So this is most ignored side of our listed traditional IT companies. And I must say this here, our Indian IT companies are no longer traditional vanilla ITES companies. Like I already mentioned, the change is happening, but unfortunately, the lack of business understanding or lack of coverage by analysts or experts over social media or a media platform is basically one of the reasons, or the some of the reasons for many not seeing this, how our listed companies are also offering excellent SaaS opportunities. So mostly here know already about Intellect Design, since a lot has been written and spoken about their businesses, and how the Intellect also started reporting SaaS numbers in their results recently, right? They have started reporting their ARR and ARR growth numbers now. So it's kind of, got eyeballs rolling, and many investors have onboarded it with so the second name that you see in the screen is Newgen, which is a low code platform business that also has SaaS offering in supply chain and business process automation and data extraction processes. And this is probably one of the only listed low code companies in India. The third name that comes to mind is the OFSS, which has financial services cloud offering, and it's a native cloud offering. It's not something that they are offering implementation or cloud implementation services. No, they have their own cloud offerings as well, as Oracle Cloud Infrastructure Services. The FlexCube, which is a SaaS-based product, which used to be a perpetual license product, is now also available as a SaaS product over the Oracle Cloud Infra. Digitate, also known as Ignio, okay, it's TCS's proprietary SaaS native offering that's already generating 100 million plus in ARR. Ignio offers operation automations and workload automation for retail companies. It enables the digital workspaces and cognitive procurement solution for the manufacturing companies, and so on and so forth. And the more interesting part is, if you search for Ignio or Digitate, you would see a completely dedicated separate website. So TCS is positioning this offering as a complete as a new age startup. It's not offering it or positioning it in one of the offerings of the TCS, but it's offering as a new age SaaS startup. Of course, the revenues are flowing in the TCS book, but it is positioned in the market as a new age startup. And this is in front of us, right? But we choose to look at only the US listed companies, or companies which are which are pure play SaaS companies, right? We are not interested to look at our traditional companies. Unitrax is LTI's SaaS native solution for banking and finance. So what it does, it offer payments and reconciliation processing solutions, and it also caters to insurance processes in product maturity, feature selection, and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll just take a couple of more minutes and I'll be done. I'll just explain what these companies are doing in their offerings. Cobalt. Okay, so Cobalt is a SaaS native solution from Infosys. It's completely SaaS native. and it offers solutions around process of information and AI-based decision flows and so on and so forth, right? And the best thing about Cobalt is it's more of a platform that offers services, solutions to enterprise and even small companies. And it has what 35,000 cloud assets, which cover about 300 plus different business solutions. But unfortunately, market doesn't see it as much like a SaaS company, right? For the obvious reasons. And finally, ICX is Tata ELXSI's offering, which basically manages and monitors the customer experience. And their OTT analytics solution called Falcon Eye also integrates into this offering to enable the companies monitor the customer experience of the content the end users are consuming via the OTT video platforms. So OTT is one of the only use cases, but ICX caters to a lot of more segments such as sales, marketing, so on and so forth, basically. So with that, I have come to an end of my presentation, and I would take some questions if there are any questions. I would just like to mention it here is, you know, this pandemic has basically given a shot in the arm, and the digital adoption is rising at a very, very high pace, very high pace. The demand for the SaaS, low code, no code, and the cloud is only going to go up. And it's very important that we understand this change, and we do not treat our we also it's important to see what our traditional ITs that are doing. Finacle is by Infosys. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. It's also from Infosys. So it's very important to also see, because see, at the end of the day, what is important, even though there are SaaS companies which are startups and you can't invest, so access to opportunity is very important, right? So there are only two ways you can access. I can either you start investing in US markets where the multiples are exponentially high, or you can look at our traditional companies who are slowly transitioning some of their offerings into SaaS. And I must tell you, this is one of the most ignored aspect. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and uh, I'm happy to take any further questions if there are any. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
thanks a lot, Amaya. It was a great presentation and explaining what is the SaaS business model and opportunities. So,
Mhm.
participants, we can take questions now. You can post your query and chat window, or you can unmute and ask your question also. So, Amaya, let me start with my question. Uh,
Sure.
how does one really rank the SaaS companies, and what separates winner from the loser in this space? You explained a
Mhm.
couple of metrics, but my question more on business point of view. Uh,
Mhm.
do we need to look at a SaaS company serving a single function for a variety of industries, or a company which is offering multiple functions vertically? So where do you think a big opportunity going?
That's pretty good question. So yeah, so the opportunity to for companies who offer different solutions to one customer in different business processes is something I would really be interested in, because what happens is it gives you an opportunity to get a little bit more pocket share of your customers. So for example, if you look at some of the listed companies, let's say Intellect Design, for example, uh, so it offers a host of digital banking SaaS products, right? So you can have one company from, let's say, US buying a corporate banking SaaS product, and one company from Australia buying a risk management product. So that's something I would really be interested in. Although there are these companies like which offer only one specific vertical services, but what happens is you have to find out how long this single vertical business or single vertical solution offering would stay relevant. Okay, for example, there is a company called as Slack, which recently listed in US. So it offers a collaboration platform for business workers, right? Business workers, as in it brings in the different collaboration paradigm for digital teams who are spanned out of different geographical locations, right? So, but if you see, is it really a kind of a sticky solution? Because you get similar options now in Trello, you get similar option in Microsoft Teams, and there are tons of different collaboration platforms that are coming in. So essentially what happens is, now to stay relevant, to ensure that the annual run rate is constant or at least that's expanding, they either have to get more customers sign up for their services, or they have to bring in additional offerings. And that's exactly where things starts getting messy. So to answer, to sum it up, I would prefer a SaaS company that has a product suite that offers different business process based solutions to a company's entire enterprise needs. I hope I answered that.
Yes, thanks, Samir. So the next one is, what are the entry barriers of companies like Newgen and Intellect Design? Don't you think existing IT service companies can build such products and can do
Yeah.
it, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the most common questions I get all the time. So, yeah, it's very important to understand the other side of the coin. And that is, we say there is no moat or there is no entry barrier. Uh, but and any traditional IT company, let's say like Infosys or TCS, they can launch their own offerings and they can basically disrupt these companies. But the question is, would they really do it? Or what is the motivation for them to do it? If you look at the business model of Newgen, for example, Newgen Solutions, it collaborates with all the key IT companies. So it has collaboration with TCS, it has a collaboration with LTI, it has collaboration with multiple software integration integrators across the globe. Plus, it also has collaboration with consulting companies such as Deloitte or McKinsey or Boston Consulting Group. So essentially, what happens is, it's because of your collaboration with them. It basically makes kind of an ethical mode that these companies will not launch the product. Also, there are two key things here. I'll tell you. So then the low code companies are very easy acquisition targets. So what happens is, rather than reinventing the wheel and launching a completely new product from scratch, companies would rather come and buy out these low code companies. So you saw what happened with AppGiver. So AppGiver is also a low code solution, and SAP simply bought it out. It did not replicate it. It simply bought it out and integrated that into their HANA cloud platform. So the low code, no code solutions or the companies are an easy acquisition target by, let's say, a big conglomerate like TCS or Infosys eventually down the line. Uh, because, you know, the business is changing so rapidly today, companies really don't want to spend 5, 6, 7 years to build a product, to see it mature, to earn customer references, and then launch it into the market as a competitor product. They want to cut down. So if your cost of acquisition is less than cost of going to market with your own product, then companies would simply do that, right? So yeah, companies can disrupt this space, but the real question is, what is the motivation to them to do that? I don't see much.
Okay. The next one is someone named PM. He says, name few US and Indian listed no code, low code players.
Uh, in India, like I said, I have only one company, which is Newgen Software, um, because it's not a no code, it's a low code company. Uh, Sorry, it basically offers the low code platform, low code solutions. So that's the only company which is currently listed in India. For the US, to be really honest, I'm not tracking US market that very closely. So I have to look around and probably, answer that
No,
um,
okay, no problem.
in
So the next
yeah,
question is
yeah.
from Raman and Yogesh. Are some of the unlisted some SaaS companies in India available in unlisted market? And is there any mutual fund or a venture or a PE fund through which a retail can participate in this unlisted space?
Mhm. Yes, I think there is a PMS actually. I don't remember which. I have to Google, but I'll just give you markers. I think there is a fund which is operated by some PMS that primarily invests in startups, but not necessarily the SaaS or digital technology startup. They just invest in startups. I will try to find out more about these, and maybe I can share the name of the startup and the name of the fund they operate, and then you can share with the TIA members later on. So that's one thing. Coming back to unlisted markets, unfortunately, I'll tell you something is by the time these shares hit an unlisted market, either the existing holders are looking for an exit, but most of the times the promising start companies, for example Postman or Browser Stack or Pine Labs for that matter, or even Freshdesk for that matter, they don't have liquidity in the unlisted market at all. Absolutely no liquidity. So the only option for you to invest in these companies is if you find a sorry, if you find some way where you can contribute along with some additional 4 or 5 different investors, so you need a network for that. And I know some of my contacts have done that already in some of the startups. Okay, so what happens is you tag along with these big guys and then you invest a small portion, and that small portion is very large for a retail investor, right? So what I would say is not necessarily in unlisted you will have any good company providing a liquidity. Unfortunately, that's not the case.
Okay. Jagadish is asking a question. Can you please explain a little bit about Freshworks offering and how its current valuation stacks up?
Oh, okay. So Freshwork valuation is something I'm not really sure of because it's very specific to the US market, but if the Freshwork or the Zendesk, they um, they basically automate their customer services. Sorry, not there. I mean, they offer product solutions in the IT services, customer services, or sales and marketing services. So it's primarily, a SaaS product which is built to how do I say, bring efficiencies in the customer experience or employee experience processes. So that's what Freshwork or Zendesk, for example, or even Zoho for that matter. So the Zoho, which is also an Indian bred startup, so that also kind of does the similar thing. But when it comes to valuations, like I said, you have to use the valuation matrix that we have just discussed in this presentation and then look at these companies yourself. So I haven't valued these companies myself yet.
Okay. The question from Karna. What are the percentage of revenues of SaaS in our traditional IT companies? Can they
Yeah.
scale to a meaningful percentage?
I would say it's too early to quantify that uh, because it's still the early days. But I think you would find these percentage details in the either the company con calls or the earning presentations of some of the companies. Because TCS, I know it reports the revenue from Ignio separately in a separate head. So you can actually track the performance of Ignio and how Ignio is doing on all the different SaaS metrics. Also, Intellect Design also reports the SaaS revenues under a different head. They report all the SaaS based metrics. So, for example, Ignio only reports the annual run rate into TCS's books, but Intellect Design reports a more matrix in their earnings. So you can find these details in the earning presentations of these companies. But the other companies, for example, like the Tata ELXSI or LTI or Infosys, they are not separating the revenues from these SaaS products separately. They are kind of consolidating it in the digital revenues itself. So it's a little bit difficult. And even if you ask this question in the con call, they'll still say that we are not separating it out as a different service. We are consolidating those in the digital revenues only.
Okay. There's a question from Madhav. Could you share sources to find SaaS startups to invest in? Any particular verticals that you feel are getting more traction?
Yeah, sure. So I already shared link in the presentation. It's called SaaS Boomi, Boomi. So if you go to SaaS Boomi, the website, you will have an option called Indian SaaS Tribe. And in that Indian SaaS Tribe section, you will find almost all these Indian SaaS based product companies that are currently working. So for example, if I just head there right now and the Indian SaaS Tribe, I can find out um, 1 minute. So yeah, so I can find out different companies by different industries, by different domains, and there are so many different filters like what is the company, what is the business it's doing, and so on and so forth. So this is very good platform. You can go to this saasboomi.com and head to Indian SaaS Tribe, and there are literally thousands of SaaS companies that are currently operating out of India or have base in India. You will find out all the details. You will find the details like website, who is the founder, at what location this company is operating, what domain is it operating, or what is the phase. Of course, probably that needs a premium access to SaaS Boomi to get this more information, but that's the one of the early access avenues for you. So that's one thing. What was the follow-up question, Suni, if you can repeat? Hello?
That was the question actually.
Oh, okay.
So the next question is someone is asking what is your view on CPaaS? How do you think Route Mobile Tanla against US based Twilio?
See, I'll not again talk about the valuation, but I'll talk about the technology because that's what this session is about. So, okay, let me give you this paradigm properly. So what's happening right now is we are moving from 4G to 5G, right? And then we are also moving from we are moving to a paradigm, business paradigm where the factories or the machines or the things or everything is basically always connected to internet. So the IoT platforms and the industrial IoT platforms, that's basically where we are heading to. Okay. So I know for the fact that we haven't even digitized 1% of the global factories which are currently completely operating out of silos, and they are not connected to any of the IoT or IIoT or internet platforms. Okay. So this is essentially where we are eventually going to head to. So factories will be smarter and the business units will be smarter and so on and so forth. So what happens with this transition is the communication between two things. For example, a vehicle, a smart vehicle or a smart factory, and the data aggregator or the place where actually this data is getting assimilated into and getting translated into a more meaningful insight. That communication and the real-time communication of that data connectivity, that's what really matters, right? And that's where the key, the quality of the real-time data connection is what matters, and that's why the quality of communication also matters. So if you have a good quality communication layer, it becomes a little easy for companies to build a lot more meaningful product on top of that. So I'm pretty a bit about this, at least in India. And when it comes to valuations, we can't really talk anything about it because market may perceive something differently and they give different valuations. But I'm very a bit about communication as a platform, because we haven't even scratched the surface yet. We think that these companies are doing only specific or small bits in the entire large tech ecosystem, but that's not really the case. These companies are going to have a lot more business from the new age, always connected smart devices, smart cities, smart vehicles, and so on.
Okay. The next one is up until now, SaaS market is dominated by US companies.
Hmm.
Post-pandemic, we are seeing emergence of SaaS in India in a very big way. So, what exactly driving this boom in India? Is it a cost advantage, or is it basically leveraging Indian talent pool, or easy access to capital? Which one do you think is the major driving force?
I think none of these. So it's not that the Indian talent pool was not accessible or Indian SaaS was doing any different. The Indian SaaS was actually doing pretty good even before the pandemic. But unfortunately, it was not one of the discovered spaces. For primary reason is, before the pandemic hit, companies were really reluctant to change because they were not presented with a new remote only working environment, right? So suddenly when it hit the remote working environment, a lot changed on the business side as well. So uh, staying on had more importance than providing a solution, right? So factory, I know factories basically shut down for a long period of time. They couldn't operate, right? So this change in paradigm is what basically is driving. So what happened is this pandemic kind of made the companies globally aware that they can adopt this technology at a very minimal risk. It wasn't that they were not aware of, but it's just that they were reluctant to adopt it or reluctant to change. But pandemic made fundamental change the way companies do businesses. And then companies, it's like, the tiger tested the blood. So companies tasted the high margin that was coming in because people were working remotely, and it was very easy to reach out to customer with the digital collaboration SaaS platforms. So customer interaction, sales channels, everything transformed. And why companies transformed? Because their customers were more willing to. So if you are an Indian tech startup who also has a SaaS offering, but you're not offering that, why? Because your end customer wants you to come down, fly down to their office personally, present your product, have a meeting with them like a couple of times, and then they finally sign a deal. But with this new paradigm, people were forced to look for opportunities like Zoom calls, for example, or the Cisco Web Connect that we are. It was always there. DocuSign has flourished in the pandemic. So earlier people were not trusting the digital signs and they were not taking it on the face value. But this pandemic has changed the end customer, and that's why the Indian tech companies or the SaaS companies, they have got more avenues to present their products to. So at least that, I think that's what is changing. The end customer has opened the mind for these new offerings, and that's what is basically driving the change. And what happens is it's a network effect. So if one manufacturing company adopts this way, the competitor would also want to do that, and then it just triggers the network effect. That's what is happening right now.
Okay, thanks. I think we'll take one last question. We'll take a question from Yogi. He's asking what are your views about the valuations of intellect design and illusion, which are actually separated from traditional IT companies, which they show sequential quarter-on-quarter growth, whereas
Mhm.
these companies are, behaves like a cyclical, like in nature. So,
Right.
do you see a value in these companies?
Do I see a value? Absolutely, I do. So there is no question about it. But value not necessarily means valuation. So that's one thing. Second thing is, like I said earlier, since we don't have many listed SaaS opportunities, it was kind of a frenzy in the secondary markets where people actually jumped on um, to buy these companies at elevated levels without understanding whether the revenues and the monetization of the existing products would stick around or not, right? Uh, what Intellect Design in the con call, what Intellect Design says in the con call still is they don't want us investors to look at them as a sequentially growing technology company. They want us to see them as a product company that has certain business cycles. There are certain business peaks, there are certain business lows, and so on. But when it comes, when eventually they transition to SaaS, they are transitioning into SaaS. They are not completely there. They are just transitioning into SaaS. Once they transition into SaaS, this cyclicality will actually go off completely. So until then, there will definitely be a kind of little bit of cyclicality in the business, because what happens is you have to build a product, reach out to customers, and request them to be a reference customer. That's exactly when you start monetizing your product, go to market, and that's when your R&D and the development expenses are at the lowest, and that's why your windfall gains from the expansion, margin expansion is suddenly something market notices immediately. That's what exactly happened in case of Intellect Design. So suddenly market started seeing, okay, from nowhere to a very high margin, that's what Intellect Design has come. But you have to keep in mind, and that's what the management has also guided, that there will be a seasonality in the business when eventually the existing features which are completely monetized, company has to go back on the drawing board. They again have to launch new features and then again come back to market. So that's a cycle which is going to play out. But the key thing to keep a track is how much of their portfolio they are moving to SaaS. Because if gradually they are moving their more and more offerings on SaaS, then this cyclicality will completely go off. So I think that's what our investors should track. When it comes to Newgen, for example, like I said, it also has a bit of seasonality, but their recent offerings around the data extraction and the template UI, for example, and the supply chain solution that they have recently launched on top of blockchain. So it's a completely SaaS native solution. But like I said, it's little early for our Indian IT companies to transition completely into SaaS, but that transition is happening. So we can keep a track on these companies, and the future is very bright. I'm very optimistic about this space. I hope I'm able to answer because I'm not answering on the valuation. I'm not saying this company is expensive, that company is not expensive, because that's not what I want to do here. So I hope that's okay.
Some light on cash flow metrics for SaaS companies, because some of the companies posting net loss in their growing stage. So do you look at for any operating cash flow percentage in such kind of companies?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so see, the traditional cash flow metrics that you usually use for evaluating, let's say, an IT company or a technology company, that is still valid. It's not that those metrics are not valid. You can go and still use those metrics. But the ARR or the expansion ARR that I talked about, these are all cash metrics itself. And the burn multiple exactly is similar to finding out, how much company is investing in order to run a 1 rupee of revenue, right? So the standard cash flow metrics that we use, that stays. There is no absolutely change about it. In addition to that, what you get is a customer lifetime value. So that's very interesting metric. So what you can do is you can extrapolate you can determine the customer lifetime, and then you can extrapolate the customer lifetime value by simply multiplying the customer revenue and the lifetime of that customer. So you can normalize the customer lifetime revenues from your product. So that becomes one of the cash metrics. the cash flow analysis that you usually do with these companies would probably not necessarily be important. But like I said, the burn multiple is something of the highest importance, and that's gonna give you an insight into what's gonna happen next, whether the company is gonna turn cash positive or not. So if you see, let's take an example of recently listed IPO companies, right? That so-called tech companies. What you can do is you can actually start digging out and try to find out, okay, when 5 years ago, what was the burn multiple reported by these companies? If you don't find a burn multiple, I give you a formula to find that out. You can actually determine burn multiple yourself. If you still can't find out, I would be more than happy to help you finding a burn multiple for the recently listed company. Then what we do is we basically extrapolate that burn multiple over number of periods. We look at last 3 years burn multiple, we look at 5 years and 7 years. And then we compare that with the customer lifetime value, or the LTV metric that I explained. And from there, we can extrapolate whether the listed company is really gonna make profit or it's gonna stay cash flow negative. So burn multiple will help you find out all these things.
Thanks, Amir. Thanks, Jimmy.